President-elect Donald Trump has chosen Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to lead the Department of Health and Human Services.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he came in. And he's going to help make America healthy again.
If confirmed, Kennedy would be in charge of key health agencies, including the Centers for Disease Control and the Food and Drug Administration. Kennedy has made several disproven claims, like linking vaccines to autism, and he's vowed to remove fluoride from drinking water. Health experts in the United States are speaking out about this choice, and earlier I spoke to the former acting director for the Centers for Disease Control about his concerns. Dr. Richard Besser, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
What was your reaction when you heard that RFK Jr. was nominated to lead the Department of Health and Human Services?
I think I have to say I was shocked. This is a serious position that requires a serious person. And when it comes to health and the issues around health, there are very few people in America who have contributed more to the distrust in public health in particular than Mr. Kennedy.
Well, yeah, and distrust and disinformation. He has said, for instance, for people that aren't aware, disproven claims that vaccines are linked to autism, that fluoride is linked to neurodevelopmental disorders. What is your biggest concern around some of his messaging? And certainly the vaccines would be troubling, but what is your biggest concern?
Well, one of my biggest concerns is really relates to the role of the Department of Health and Human Services in the United States. This is a huge department that is responsible for all of the aspects of public health. So ensuring that our food supply is safe, the air that we breathe is breathable, that we have across the country systems in place to ensure that when you go and order a meal, that it is a safe meal to eat. These are all aspects of public health. It's also responsible for our Food and Drug Administration, which approves medications, ensures that they're safe and effective. It's responsible for the National Institutes of Health, which is the world's leading funder of biomedical research. And then it oversees our health insurance program. 180 million people in our country get their health insurance through Medicare and Medicaid. Medicaid provides for people with lower incomes, for people with disabilities, and Medicare provides health insurance for people who are elderly. And to have someone in this role who has done so much to discredit science and fact is concerning. And it's doubly concerning because, as with most people who are purveyors of misinformation, bits and pieces of what Mr. Kennedy lifts up are really good ideas. And when you mix those together with falsehood, it makes it much harder for the individual to know what's good and what's not.
Well, one of those ideas is to look at illnesses related to what he calls ultra-processed foods, which doesn't sound too bad, actually, which sounds like something that should be considered. Would that be something you would point to as, not a bad idea, a good idea?
Let's look at our school lunch program. Our school lunch program here provides meals for more than 30 million children, over half their calories a day. And what if we decided to make it the healthiest lunch possible and get processed food out of that? It would mean investing in our schools so that they had kitchens and could make fresh food. And it would take getting big business out of the lobbying role that they often are in when the school lunch program is looked at, and getting processed food out. I think that would be a terrific idea.
What about vaccines? I mentioned it there briefly. He has said he wouldn't ban or block vaccines, but yeah. I am not sure that equates to he would require vaccination in certain instances. What are your concerns about how that might be viewed, particularly post-COVID, when a lot of people were concerned and questioning vaccines?
Well, I practiced pediatrics for more than 30 years, and I know that there's nothing I did as a pediatrician that had more proven value for the health of the children I was helping take care of than making sure they were vaccinated fully and on time. It is absolutely essential that our children are vaccinated. And while our numbers are still above 90%, we know that any drop off in vaccination rates in young children can set schools up for outbreaks. We see it time and time again. With COVID and the COVID pandemic, it was the first time that a public health response had been politicized to that extent. I ran emergency preparedness and response at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for 4 years under the Bush administration. And with every public health crisis, we saw government come together. We saw bipartisan support for doing the job and getting it done right. With COVID, we saw public health officials being demonized. We saw public health decisions being turned into political ping pong. And that was very dangerous. It led a lot of people to decide not to get vaccinated. We know that the vaccines around the world saved millions of lives.
Is he in any way qualified for this position beyond being a friend to Donald Trump and having thrown his support behind him? And does the position require someone who understands science?
Well, you don't need to be a doctor to be the Secretary of Health. If you look at who's tended to be in that role in the past, a lot of times it's governors. And the reason for that is that the department is so complicated. You want someone who can run a large bureaucracy. And then they will often surround themselves by experts in health and science. Mr. Kennedy, on the other hand, doesn't have that experience with governing and puts himself forward as the expert. And that's where the danger comes in. You need to have policy being driven by evidence, by the best facts, best science available. And that's a challenge here.
The president-elect, you mentioned Medicaid and Medicare. The president-elect also chose Dr. Oz to lead that part of the solution. And I have no idea what that will result in. What do you think what do you think will happen?
Well, again, within the department, that area, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, is probably the most complex. And what you've tended to see in terms of the people running that are people with deep expertise in health insurance to be able to run these programs. Dr. Oz is another person who's thrown out a lot of good ideas and mixed it in with a lot of pseudoscience and junk medicine. And because of that, I think he's not qualified to be in that role. About 10 years ago, he was called before the Senate because of concerns that they were raising about the products he was lifting up and potential conflicts of interest. So I worry that he will have a platform to spread some of his ideas and that will be challenging as well.
Obviously, Canada is invested in this because of things like a pandemic, if it were to happen again, and how that is approached in your country. Tell me, just end on this, how worried are you about Americans' health moving forward?
Well, it depends on what the Senate decides to do. Sure. The way our system works, the Senate will have to review these nominations and vote on them. If they do their job well, I think they'll look at the evidence and they'll decide not to move these people forward. If they do move forward, then I have worries. I worry about the next major health crisis and our ability to respond with fact and evidence. Both of these individuals lifted up treatments for COVID that were unfounded and not effective. And that's a problem when you have that in leaders of a department of this impact.
Okay, Dr. Besser, thank you for coming on the program. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
I know there are people disappointed that I won't be the next attorney general, but you have to understand this is the political process. And sometimes the path you're on is one that takes you to a different place, and it could be a glorious place. My good friend Pam Bondi is going to be a phenomenal attorney general for Donald Trump.
Matt Gaetz are announcing he's withdrawing his name from consideration to be the next pick for Attorney General. That's where we will start on our American Roundtable this week. With us today, Anita Kumar, Senior Managing Editor at Politico, and Sasha Eisenberg, political journalist and author of The Lie Detectives. Good to see you both this morning. So it looks as though all the cabinet nominations are done now, but the big news over the past week was this the problems around Matt Gaetz, to say the least, withdrawing as Attorney General and saying that he's not going to go back to Congress either. How big a setback is this, Anita, for Donald Trump? Or is this sort of what he thought might happen?
That Donald Trump has kind of come into this transition different than he did 8 years ago, right? So last time he had, the win took people by surprise. He won a lot more votes in a lot more states, I think, than a lot of people, even thought he would. And he's come into the transition sort of picking loyalists, people he's known, people who've been by his side. Last time, remember, he was interviewing people, people that were considered a little bit more establishment Republican in many of those cases, people that had been recommended. So he did pick his friend and longtime sort of ally, Matt Gaetz. I will say, though, that there's some very, different things about this situation. So I wouldn't read too much into it. Matt Gaetz, as you know, had been in Congress and had really made a lot of enemies, not just in the House, but in the Senate as well with Senate Republicans. So he had that going in. There were also revelations that were still coming out. So we kept seeing in the 8 days that this had been going on, more allegations, more revelations in the media. And we had this whole, House investigation. And so if that report was going to come out, we'd probably see more. He was going to have to testify in front of the Senate. So I think all of those things combined made sort of a unique situation where Senate Republicans felt like there were enough, that they could push back there. And both the president-elect and the congressman, now former congressman, felt that there were enough people that were going to vote against him that it wasn't going to change. It probably would have gotten to be, even more people.
Okay, well, we'll talk about more names, and do both of you tell me whether you think this is, Senate Republicans sort of flexing their muscle, or, to your point, Anita, this is a particular instance. But Sasha, I want to ask you about the person that Trump then named to take on this job. That's Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi as his second choice. What do we know about her, and if she is capable of doing this job?
Yeah, I mean, she has a far more traditional resume to be U.S. Attorney General than Gaetz did, who had barely practiced law ever. So she's been Attorney General of the state, in many ways quite effective. Crime rates went down and such. But she also, like Gaetz, is a Trump loyalist, a very personalized idea of loyalty that Trump demands. She was active in his impeachment defense before the Senate, and also in his efforts post the 2020 election to try to overturn the results or challenge them in states. And so it's probably a safer pick. And, there's no indication of any of the sort of personal scandal that hung over Gaetz. So Trump could come away getting a lot of what he wanted from Gaetz, which is somebody who shares his vision that he is sort of under attack from what he calls the deep state, and is sort of personally loyal to him, but with a lot less of the baggage going in and a lot less antipathy from Republican senators.
Okay, so speaking of people with controversial potential allegations with them, Anita, the defense secretary, former Fox News host Pete Hegseth, is also controversial. Police records show that there was a sexual assault allegation against him. No charges were laid, but that's still out there. And there's a whole bunch of stuff around him, I should say. It's not just that. How do you think that nomination is going to play out?
Yeah, I do think that you're seeing people on Capitol Hill and elsewhere concerned about the pick, that he doesn't have the background that's traditional for someone who's going to oversee this huge sprawling department with, people all over the world. And so there are concerns about that. You mentioned the allegations, which obviously he was accused of, he was investigated for, but then that was closed without any charges being brought. I do think it's a little bit different here than Gaetz because a couple things. One, there was that investigation. You can read the investigation. You can read some paperwork on it. It was closed. We'll see if there's other things that are going to come out or not. But so far, it's sort of been they tried to sort of say, look, it was this one incident and nothing came of it. But, there are some questions being raised. But I will say, even after Matt Gaetz got out, even, in those final days of last week, people were saying, well, we're gonna give him a shot. We're gonna see what he has to say. We're gonna see this through. So I haven't seen the level of pushback from senators, even Senate Republicans, that we did see on Matt Gaetz. Of course, you don't know what's going to happen. They'll go through the process. It's possible other things will come out and there'll be other concerns. It is a controversial pick for sure, but not sure sort of where that's going to end up.
Yeah, and I guess there are some reports too, Sasha, that the Trump transition team is looking at alternates if they need them, but didn't say, how that might shake down. What are your thoughts about this nomination?
I mean, one of the things that's really interesting to note on Hegseth in particular, I think this comes out, is that Trump is bypassing the traditional background check process that transitions engage, using the FBI and the apparatus of government to do a sort of very rigorous scrub on the backgrounds of individuals. And it's not just to determine whether they would pose some sort of political embarrassment, but whether they could be subject to blackmail, for example, or things that could really weaken their ability to serve the public interest. And by all accounts, the Trump people were sort of blindsided by the stuff that's coming out now around Hegseth. And I think that, we should be sort of more prepared for surprises like this to come out about his nominees, just because they might not have sort of run the traps the way that they would have 8 years ago, even when they were reliant on the background check process.
I mean, you'd think you would want to do that, right? That it would protect you politically a little bit to subject your candidates to that. But obviously, nothing is clear about what the process down there. So, Anita, just to finish off then, do we think that Senate Republicans are flexing muscles here, or has Trump misjudged what might happen? What is your assessment on that?
Well, I think we saw sort of a signal even before all of this, when the Senate Republicans were choosing their new leader. This is the leader for next year, starting in January. They actually didn't choose the Trump-aligned person, who's Rick Scott, the senator of Florida. They picked John Thune, a more sort of establishment Republican, if you will. He's had his disagreements with Donald Trump in the past. Of course, he said, as he won, and even before that he's going to work with the new president and he's going to push forward on that legislative agenda. But there was a little bit of a signal. Now, I would say there's a caveat there, which is the vote was in secret, right? So they didn't have to come out and say, look, I'm not voting for Donald Trump's guy. But I do think you can sort of read into that. Look, they are their own chamber, and they are going to do some things that are different. You saw the pushback with Matt Gaetz. Now, how much of that it remains to be seen. We've seen a lot of Senate Republicans, including the new leader, say, look, I'm going to work with Donald Trump. We're here to help him with his agenda and his legislation. And so it really depends on sort of how much they decide to push back. All indications are it's going to be some, but maybe not as much as Democrats for sure would like.
Sasha, I'm out of time. So next time you come back, I'll give you all the time. How about that? Sasha.
Thank you, Rosie.
Sasha Eisenberg, Anita Kumar, thank you both so much. Have a great Sunday. Appreciate it.
You too.